This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. Good evening. Trouble looms tonight for thousands of travelers. That's the scenario after President Bush brushed aside recommendations of federal mediators that he intervene, but instead he leaves Eastern Airlines and its machinist union to settle their fight before midnight on their own. The union already is crying lockout, management is charging vandalism, and passengers are finding flights canceled or delayed. Our coverage of the turbulence surrounding a once profitable, once proud airline begins with Peter Van Sant.
The final countdown to a midnight strike which could cripple Eastern Airlines is underway after President Bush this afternoon refused to intervene in the labor dispute.
There is no sense in prolonging the dispute that's gone on for 17 months. The people of this country have a right to have that dispute resolved.
Eastern went on the attack early today, telling machinists in maintenance facilities across the country that they had 15 minutes to pack up and get out.
They said they didn't want us on Eastern property.
Everybody's all for strike. They want to close it down and get it straightened away, or else just walk away from it.
In Atlanta, the gates to the maintenance hangar were locked.
I don't like what I'm seeing. I had wanted some type of settlement.
Frank Lorenzo's a cancer that must be removed.
Hundreds of machinists gathered in an empty lot across from the hangar where union leaders fired them up with strike talk.
As far as we're concerned, this thing has started at 10:30 this morning when they locked us the hell out of Eastern Airlines. But we will be back.
Soon after the machinists were locked out, thousands of Eastern passengers had their flights delayed or canceled as union ground personnel disappeared.
Well, we're a little bit aggravated because they had already canceled one of the flights.
Canceled the flight we were on. I got to go call Delta and excuse me.
Hundreds of inexperienced replacement workers struggled to fill in for the locked-out machinists, raising new safety concerns.
I think as of the moment they go on strike, they're going to be a very unsafe airline.
If the FAA finds a plane does not conform to its standard, it will be shut down.
Late this afternoon, following a pledge from pilots to honor any picket line, Eastern announced that it will drop service tomorrow to 57 cities across the country should a strike occur.
We believe that in the worst of the cases, we could operate somewhere between 20 and 30% of our operation.
Tonight, negotiations are continuing. The Reverend Jesse Jackson has called for civil disobedience to support the union.
It means demonstrations. It means mass education. It means people willing to go to jail.
One machinist leader has told CBS News that a strike could be delayed several days if the company comes up with a significantly improved offer, which would then be put to a vote of the entire machinist union. Such an offer, if it comes at all, isn't expected until we approach the midnight hour. Peter Van Sant, CBS News, Atlanta.
Eastern is one of the nation's oldest airlines and has been flying under a black cloud for much of its history. Even when Eleanor Roosevelt tried to christen new service, the airline was plagued with problems. Eastern's already tough life was made tougher by deregulation, especially because it has some of the worst labor management relations in the industry.
There's something in the psyche of that corporation that I don't understand that goes back at least way before deregulation that looks like a death wish.
Eastern bitterly fought deregulation. According to experts, it never learned the new rules of the airline game, didn't go after the right routes quickly enough. The airline deteriorated to the point where now it is losing $1 million a day. If Eastern does go under, it will mean the remaining healthy airlines will have that much more power, which worries the father of airline deregulation, Alfred Kahn.
The real concern is the disappearance of another airline that is the source of potential competition protecting the public. That's what I don't want to see.
Well, ironically, Eastern's owner is a product of deregulation. Frank Lorenzo bought the airline after building his Texas Air Corporation from a one-state carrier to an international airline. Eastern's combative unions now say Lorenzo is fueling Texas Air's growth by selling off parts of Eastern, and airline analysts now believe Eastern may be too poor to survive a long strike. Dan?
Thank you, Richard. Investigators still don't know why a section of fuselage ripped from a United Airlines jetliner over the Pacific last month. 9 people died. But if there's mystery about the cause, there is praise for the crew's skill in returning the jet to Honolulu without further damage. Today, members of that crew relive the drama. John Blackstone was there.
Captain David Cronin says everything was normal on Flight 811 until there was an awesome exploding noise.
We went for our oxygen masks, all three of us, put them on, and there was no oxygen. I immediately tossed the oxygen mask over my shoulder, pulled the power off, called for emergency descent.
Second Officer Mark Thomas left the cockpit to see what had happened.
When I went downstairs and looked outside, it was just like looking outside through a picture window. I could see the entire wing.
The crewmen admit they did not go by the book.
The magnitude of this required that we revert almost to survival instincts.
There's no airspeed that they give you for 2 inches out, partial flaps, and a big hole in the side of the jet.
So they improvised, and all three say they had no time to be afraid.
When I saw the runway in sight, the next decision was, what's going to happen to this airplane when we start putting out flaps and dropping the landing gear? We could hear from our cockpit the flight attendants on the bullhorns saying, grab your ankles, put your heads down. We used between 190 and 200 knots on the final, and I stayed above the glide path, dropped the landing gear, knowing that we had to land. This was no second chances on this. And it turned out okay.
Flight 811 was Captain Cronin's next to last flight before retirement. He says he'll miss flying the 747. John Blackstone, CBS News, San Francisco.
Important meeting in London this weekend. Scientists from around the world out to save the shield around the Earth. Today, President Bush jumped on the international Save the Ozone bandwagon. CBS News Chief European Correspondent Tom Fenton has our report.
Today, the United States ended a long impasse on the environment. President Bush became the latest Western leader to call for a ban by the end of the century on chemicals harmful to the ozone layer.
It is scientific advancements that made us aware of the damage to our Earth's protective ozone layer.
Recent high-altitude tests discovered an alarming new hole in the ozone over the Arctic. Scientists say chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, used in refrigeration, insulation, and aerosol sprays are depleting the ozone layer at a rapid rate. Yesterday, 12 European nations agreed on the ban, including Britain, Europe's #1 producer of CFCs. This represents a major policy shift in conservative Britain, where an environmental movement used to mean Margaret Thatcher appealing to citizens to pick up the trash. What Mrs. Thatcher has responded to is a public outcry against pollution and an increased demand for ozone-safe products.
You're making life hell for the others, you know.
Not one to be left out of a political trend, Mrs. Thatcher will present this new video at an ozone conference here starting Sunday. The Prime Minister wants her critics to know that she, a former chemist, is environmentally aware.
She's taken it seriously as a very personal issue. Of course, the question, as always with these personal issues, is in a month, 2 months' time, will her mind move on to something else?
You'll be the death of me, you lot. You really will.
Environmentalists suspect the new concern may have as much to do with politics as ecology, but say that any incentive to save the Earth's ozone layer comes not a moment too soon.
They're taking away your oxygen, you ninny.
Tom Fenton, CBS News, London.
And still to come on the CBS Evening News. Correspondent Bob Fall on the Legion of Deranged with no place to go. And Bob McNamara on the healing serenity of a springtime trout stream. Time today for Robert McFarlane, the former national security aide to Ronald Reagan and one-time superior of Oliver North. CBS News law correspondent Rita Braver reports what McFarlane got today for pleading guilty to charges of lying to Congress about the weapons for Iran wheeling and dealing fiasco.
The first man to be sentenced in the Iran-Contra scandal will not be going to jail. Robert McFarlane, who served as national security advisor to former President Reagan, faced 4 years in prison, but was given a suspended sentence, put on probation for 2 years, fined $20,000, and ordered to perform 200 hours of community service. Last March, McFarlane pleaded guilty to 4 misdemeanor charges of lying to Congress in letters and testimony when he answered questions about the National Security Staff's help for the Nicaraguan Contras at a time when Congress had banned such aid. Today, the former Marine stood straight and grim-faced as he told the judge, "This episode in our history has resulted in enormous turmoil, and to the extent I contributed to that, I regret it. I tried to serve my country." Judge Aubrey Robinson gave no explanation of why he decided on no jail, and independent counsel Lawrence Walsh would not comment on the sentence.
The government made no recommendation whatever.
McFarlane implied his trouble stemmed from the tension between the White House and Capitol Hill.
Determining how we can improve our system so that the presidency and the Congress work better with each other remains to be done.
Lee Hamilton chaired a committee to which McFarlane lied.
I think it is an appropriate sentence. He is cooperating with the prosecution.
In fact, McFarlane could have been charged with more serious offenses, but he's agreed to testify against his former top aide, Oliver North, who's now on trial in this very courthouse. Rita Braver, CBS News, Washington.
The Defense Department today announced and released pictures of what it calls the first successful use of an experimental U.S. military laser beam to shoot down a high-speed target. The Pentagon said the Navy's so-called Miracle laser tracked and destroyed this low-flying anti-aircraft missile February 23rd over the government's White Sands Range in New Mexico. The Miracle laser is currently the focus of controversy inside and outside the Pentagon over whether it should be developed as a weapon to zap enemy satellites out of the sky. NASA today set Saturday, March 11th for launch of Space Shuttle Discovery, the much-delayed first shuttle mission of 1989. NASA is under growing pressure to get Discovery off to make way for the next mission by Shuttle Atlantis. Atlantis must launch a $500 million probe to Venus by the end of May, or wait another 2 years until the planets are in the right positions again.
It's time to change your bulb to Philips. Philips Longer Life Square bulbs last 33% longer than ordinary bulbs.
More moving and shouting today around the John Tower nomination showdown in the U.S. Senate. Nothing to indicate any turnaround for Tower. One of President Bush's last best hopes of getting a Democrat to vote yes today said he will vote no. Some Republicans in the Senate are trying another late bold move. On Capitol Hill, our chief Washington correspondent, Bob Schieffer, has the latest. Bob?
Dan, the suggestion offered by Senate Republican leader Bob Dole was a real surprise that Tower be allowed to make his own case on the Senate floor.
The request would be that John Tower be allowed to come to this chamber and to stand in this well and to answer his critics face to face, charge by charge, rumor by rumor, and fact by fact.
Dole's dramatic offer came as the president went to the Pentagon to shift the Save Tower campaign into high gear with a high-profile show of support.
Our working assumption is to continue the discussion of John Tower. I do believe that in a certain period of time, as things go on, the numbers keep dwindling.
Indeed, Deacon Cini of Arizona, another of the undecided Democrats the Republicans had hoped to win, announced today he'll vote against Tower. And Tower's problems with some on the Republican right have made it harder to build grassroots support.
In my estimation, George Bush is running down his enormous moral fund, and he should ask for Tower to withdraw.
The Republican strategy on the Senate floor was to discredit the FBI report on Tower as rumor and innuendo, but Senate Democrats weren't buying.
Well, the FBI report that has been so severely criticized here is the same report that President Bush relied on.
Again today, the sharpest words came over the question of Tower's alleged drinking problem.
The fellow's got a problem. Let him handle the problem.
He is my friend. I thought he was your friend. And I want some justice for my friend.
To buttress their argument that rumor has overtaken fact, the Republicans pointed to one incident cited by CBS News and the Washington Post, in which an eyewitness claimed that Tower, who appeared drunk, tried to fondle a female employee at a military base. Republicans countered by releasing a letter from the Air Force stating the witness had a mixed personality disorder, and other witnesses disputed his story. As for appearing on the Senate floor to answer questions, Tower said tonight if that's what senators want, he'll oblige. In the meantime, he'll hone his argument this weekend on TV. Dan?
Thanks, Bob. The Commerce Department today reported its main measure of future economic activity jumped a healthy 0.6% in January. That was the second straight strong showing for the index of leading indicators, which spent much of last year seesawing from month to month. The index is designed to predict economic activity 6 to 9 months in the future. Not have the cash to pay even the interest on his country's $32 billion foreign debt. Carlos Andres Perez also said the economic crisis was to blame for 4 days of rioting that killed at least 300 people in Venezuela. As calm returned to the capital today, the government eased up on martial law restrictions, trimming 3 hours off the nightly curfew, creating a new problem by attempting to solve an old one. For years, critics have charged that's what happened when reformers won the early release of patients from mental hospitals and added to the ranks of this nation's homeless. And now correspondent Bob Fall reports there are new voices calling for ways to return some of the mentally ill to institutions that can treat them.
Marge Collins lives in a comfortable house in a Washington suburb. Her son Jim, now 36, lives on the streets. A schizophrenic since he was 16, he is one of an estimated 200,000 Americans who are seriously mentally ill and homeless.
Well, what does that do to you as a mother?
Kills me. I'm a mother. I mean, you know, I think about him constantly, particularly at night when I go to bed in my nice warm bed. Particularly if it's cold and rainy, and I wonder where in the world he is.
The young Jim Collins spent time at the Springfield Mental Institution near Sykesville, Maryland. But now, he has nowhere to go.
Jim Collins and thousands of former mental patients now going without care are victims of an experiment in reform which began in America about 30 years ago. An experiment which some critics are now beginning to say was a cruel hoax.
We said, we're going to take you out of these lousy state hospitals and we're going to treat you in the community with community programs. All we did was empty out the state hospitals. We left these people with nothing.
The reformers managed to shut down hideous state hospitals where the mentally ill were merely warehoused, dumped. Commit only the sickest and most dangerous, said the reformers. Release the others and treat them with antipsychotic drugs in community mental health centers.
I think we honestly believed that we were on the right track, and I'm not sure that we weren't. We just didn't do it right.
And hundreds of thousands of people suffered.
Well, many people suffered, yes.
Really, we just depopulated. We opened up the gates, wished them well, and hoped that they would disappear.
And many did disappear into shelters, the only housing some could afford, into missions where they eat for free, then drift away,